As Juliet settles into her new role as sheriff, another murder has been discovered. Deputy Marnes. Billings has been appointed chief deputy, but can Juliet trust him enough to solve the mysterious murders? Welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I are talking about the 5th hit episode of the science fiction show Silo, so spoilers ahead. And if you want to solve all the mysteries of the Silo with me and Sterling, just hit that like and subscribe button and turn on that bell for notifications. And with that, Sterling, do you have a mug?
Well, first, I don't know if you are aware that I did take place in the race to the top, and so
Oh, did you?
from that, I did get a trophy there from
well,
the
look
race
at
to the
that.
top, and I wanted to commemorate that with this mug
Wow.
here.
How'd you
Race
do in
to
the
top,
race?
and I feel like I did great.
Ooh, last place.
Yeah, technically, you know how like in the old times they used to have like the slow cars where it's like it comes towards the end where it's like if it approaches it's gonna pick you up. Like the races, you got to stay ahead of the car. Yeah, it got me on like the 25th floor. Obviously not.
Ooh.
It's just like porters, two porters
Do they have to carry
within
you
the
the rest of the
bathroom.
way? They just like two porters put you on their back and they said, "Oh, this poor schlub, we gotta get him up there."
They just like throw you over the side. They're like everybody's important in the silo
You can't
except for
throw
this one.
you can't throw anything over the side. It's not about
True.
you. It's about the people down below. You don't want them to get hit. Down in the deep down.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about some of the world building and kind of like I think this funeral was kind of like an interesting introduction. What were your kind of thoughts on it?
So I thought, we learned about the funerals and how they bury their dead so that none of the resources go to waste. And Juliet has this great idea to bury them together to conserve resources.
And we'd kind of thought a little bit about that. The one person had said something about like being in the ground.
Right.
Like we'd literally kind of thought similar ideas to this. I don't think we had all these details, but we were in this area.
Yeah, and so we get that confirmation. But something that was very interesting to me about the whole funeral itself was the ritual that they did at the end, where they all bite the apple and throw it in.
Yeah.
And I feel like that, I mean, if you had two funerals and you each had to do it for both funerals, that's a little bit more wasteful, but like, that seems like a very odd thing to do for a society that's conserving resources.
I was kind of thinking the same thing, and then Dawn mentioned that they want to guarantee that a tree takes root. So
Oh.
all of those apples. So I was right there with you. I was like, this is so wasteful. But, and I think that like biting it also like helps to probably like start the decomposition as early as possible, like gives the bacteria an entry point, so it's like you can start to get all these nutrients into the soil, all of these seeds, and then hopefully one of them takes root because I was originally thinking if you go into the ground, there's no like burial stone. But there kind of actually is in this case. Like there's a tree that will live on
That
that
makes
people
more
can visit.
sense. I
But I
didn't.
was 100% with you. Yeah, she clarified it for me.
Another interesting thing in that funeral that I don't think we've seen yet, instruments.
We saw like very homemade looking instruments, but these were like nicer,
An
like traditional.
accordion, I think a guitar maybe.
Yes. And this was like traditional kind of brass, instrument versus like homemade like guitar or something like that. And it sounded like very traditional instruments and like sad funeral dirge. Kind of like what you mentioned about the apples. It was interesting that graves were very shallow, so it's like I think the goal is to have the nutrients by the surface where hopefully like the trees come up from, So to me, this very much made sense with this world that we've learned, where it's like you have to limit your resources. You can't have things you don't need anymore. We need like death to follow life. Like it feels like a society where it's like they really are in this weird world where they're all in it together,
Right.
and like there's such a limit to the resources.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I feel like with Bernard, the way that he views everything. So at first, I kind of thought that he was in on all the shady stuff happening. And then after, like, kind
I
of,
was with you on that.
yeah, but after kind of hearing him talk today, it seems like he's very more, talking about the story that they were going to tell for the death of the chief deputy and
Right.
the mayor at the same time, which seems like it's going to stoke a little bit of controversy throughout the silo.
Yeah. And how many people that like get power don't want to keep it? Like he very much seems like I I hope we vote somebody into this position because I want to be done with this. Like the only perk that I have is I want to drink through as much of this liquor as possible.
Right.
Other than that, like it doesn't seem like he's trying to abuse it, trying to keep this power, trying to make it get more from it. Like his one thing is he's trying to drink through the liquor.
So I was wondering
Um,
if that was a red herring, though, because
I
he has said that he is trying to get out of it a lot. Like he said it in the last
yeah
episode. I can't. Yeah, the last episode and this episode,
yeah
he said it multiple times where he's like, "Hopefully, I won't be mayor too long." And I was wondering if that was a bit of a red herring. He does seem like a very numbers guy, so
he does, and it like he doesn't seem right for the mayor position, and he doesn't seem like he's necessarily trying that hard to be right for it. Like his mayor is a very people facing position, and his eulogy was extremely awkward. You
so
know,
awkward.
like he starts off with like, everybody can relate to programming something in order to get information about like we've all lost this person, and I created a program to understand how important this person was to society.
Right. I calculated
And
all the
then,
people that she interacted with, everybody that only had her as a mayor, and this
right.
when you're societally aware. Yeah, he's kind of an awkward dude.
And then like his one joke, being like, whoever takes her place is gonna have very big shoes to fill. I mean, not literally, because she had small feet. And then like he laughed at the joke, meaning that he really did feel like this is the one. And it was like cricket, cricket, cricket.
Not even a smirk from anyone. Like, and Juliet, who didn't even know these two people very well, I felt like gave a surprisingly good eulogy to them.
Yeah, and that's a tough spot to be in, like to not know the person. And it almost, although it almost looked like she was put on the spot. Although I would hope that she was informed that she would be expected to speak. But I think kind of bringing it back to that common goal of like he served the silo and we all serve the silo, was something that I think definitely hit for people, and something I feel like we're seeing a lot of in this show.
Okay, so I feel like that brings us to this next topic of the Pact. And
Yeah.
so kind of a bridge to, from the silo world building and going to the Pact, we've noticed that there's no books in this world, in this silo,
Yeah.
and yet the Pact is printed. Juliet was reading a printed version of the Pact, so they have the ability
Right.
to print stuff but only the Pact seems to make it on the printing.
It's the pact is really interesting, and I like touched on it a little bit about like the choice of the name, the pact, but it's interesting because it does seem very shared. Like everybody does seem to have this view of for the common good, you know? And I've noticed these signs around the place. There's one of them that says, "Say no to greed, take only what you need." There's another one that says, "Look out for each other, we are better together."
Yeah, I saw those.
And it feels like this like ethos that has permeated everything of like even when you disagree with people on things, you can still agree that we need to work for the good of the silo. Even if you disagree on like how to do that.
Right.
Which is really interesting in a dystopian society. Like I feel like you generally have a lot of oppression and like this like tyrannical force that like has all power, and it definitely does seem like there is power in places where people don't know about it, and but even then it doesn't it's a weird and interesting world to me. Like it doesn't feel like your traditional dystopian society.
Yeah, and speaking of all these people working together to like keep the silo running and doing its thing, I feel like we got more information about listeners and how they're like people that don't even really exist in the silo.
Don't off the grid.
What like does that mean? Wild. Like no record of them, and like they have sway to the judicial to like put in recommendations of what they think, but nothing they hear is admissible in court. And which brings us to Billings and his view on that. Like, he is all about the Pact. It seems like he's probably read the Pact forward and backward 5 to 10 times. And, Juliet hasn't read it at all. And this one thing, it bothers him about these listeners, even though he comes from judicial, because it's not part of the Pact.
It's interesting because once again, like it kind of comes back to this idea of like for the good of the silo. Like it feels like judicial feels like it's okay to do this because it is helping them catch criminals, even though if it's not like through the Pact, like it's an okay method, it is helping them. Judge Meadows seems like she's like that. She's like she cares more about order than necessarily truth, because that's like the good of the silo.
They were gonna find a patsy to just throw in jail so that everybody's all calm and quiet. Like it's fine. We figured it out.
Right. And even when Juliet finds out the truth and she comes to Judge Meadows, we finally meet Judge Meadows, right? And that whole thing happens, and there were questions that needed to be answered, and Juliet said, "We're going to look into this because we don't know why."
Right.
And Meadows was like, "No, we've got our person. People are going to be happy with this. We're leaving it at that." I think that she knew that. I don't even know if it's necessarily that she's guilty. I don't know if she's necessarily trying to hide something she's aware of, or if it's just she thinks that some truth may be uncovered, which erodes people's faith in the system.
Well,
so I don't even know if it's like necessarily that she's bad. I can't. It's really hard to tell like who's.
Well, see
who's on what side.
Well, later we'll talk about Sims, and I think we can go a little bit deeper of like how they view the Pact and like their role in it. I do think that she is a little bit guilty though, because she, we saw Sims and his relationship with I forget his name, Doug. She kind of looks at him like, oh, he didn't seem like that, and she kind of like looks at Sims, kind of like, like, and maybe she knows things, but like, I don't know. I still don't trust Judge Meadows yet. I did think that a cool technique that they used to show the difference between Juliet and Billings and like their view on the Pact. I don't know if you noticed, but Billings had his shirt buttoned all the way to the top button. Like he's very rule follower, looking his best, gotta follow the rules of the silo. And Juliet, she's a
Yeah.
little bit more of a like, I know the Pact exists. I still believe like, even though she doesn't follow the Pact, she's still a big believer of keeping the silo in order. Like she wants to keep everybody safe in the silo.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
see her like bend some rules like that are not quite in line with the Pact to get things done. And her shirt is like unbuttoned 3 buttons, and like you can see her undershirt under her. I like that little technique they used.
That's that's clever. And that's kind of my reading on Billings, where it's like, is his strength is he believes in the rules, and that's always one of those weird things to be in, when it's like you're a rule follower and the people above you clearly aren't necessarily following the rules. Like Judicial is using these listeners, which aren't technically part of the Pact, but also part of following the rules is like following your boss, who tells you to do this thing based off of information that they got from listeners. So it's like, so he seems, and I said this about Rob Sims, so who knows, maybe I'm just falling for anybody who like shows a little bit of warmth. He seems like a good guy
I
who's
do. I
who's
do
potentially just like easily manipulated, you know?
see. I do think Billings is a good guy, based on like his actions of going to Judicial. They gave him information, wrong information, so that they would take it to Juliet. And I do believe that he thought that he was doing the right thing by bringing it to Juliet.
And I think they knew that about him, because I think he is such a rule follower that like they probably told him, like, you need to report in with us, and then they knew that he would turn around and report that into his new boss. So it's
Yeah.
like I think they exploited the fact that they know that he's a good guy.
Yeah, but I do think Billings is on the side of good overall.
Yes.
Sims, I
Meadows?
I don't think Meadows is on
tough.
the side of good. I think Meadows is, well, unless it depends on what you value as good. If keeping order in the silo is good, then maybe Meadows is good.
That's the thing. It's like this is it's tough, and I don't feel like these are interesting characters that we're kind of seeing, where we're not necessarily seeing people who are taking power in order to make their lives more comfortable. Which I think that is when you do things because you want to live this lavish lifestyle and you abuse the people below you. Like, I think that is like a true level of evil that can sometimes be almost like comical and hard to believe, versus when you see people who are like doing what they honestly believe is potentially right, but also making decisions that you disagree with. Like this, it seems like there's a lot of kind of gray, like Juliet clearly isn't following the rules by breaking in. Billings knows that the group he was a part of isn't necessarily following the rules. Like everybody still seems like they are generally trying to work for the greater good. It's interesting. It seems like there's like very interesting shade of kind of gray with everything. Who's good, who's bad, like who's just like looking out for the good of the silo and is doing things that we would think is questionable but makes sense. This show, it's really fucking tough to tell. I I really thought with Sims, he's good. And now I still kind of think he's good, but I also think he's doing bad things for good reasons.
See, I don't feel like anybody that we've seen has done anything selfishly, like for their own
Yeah.
personal gain. It seems like everything that's being done is for what they believe is the greater good.
Yeah. If you think about like puzzle boxes, I think Lost. Okay, so like Lost was one of the original puzzle box. I don't know if it's like the OG, probably not, but like one of like the big puzzle box ones in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Lost had a reputation of giving more questions than it gave answers, and not necessarily knowing where it's going. And so over time, like just leaving threads hanging. And so it's tough to tell exactly where this is going because this one, this show definitely feels like it is comfortable with opening a thread and then very clearly and intentionally, it's not that they forgot it because it's such a big question that they've like opened up. And they're like, let's just leave this for 4 episodes.
Seriously, like we haven't even. The outside was very prominent first 2 episodes, and it's like
So prominent.
now we're not even talking about it. It doesn't matter.
So it does feel like they're gonna come back to these threads. I don't think this is a lost situation where it's like they don't know what they're trying to do and they're gonna forget about threads because it's just not the intent of this season's writers.
Mm-hmm.
Because like this is the current season. I think that's where Lost had the issue was it never knew where it's going long term, and so
Yes.
it's like the next season there may be new writers that don't care about threads and leave them, and the next season there's writers that don't necessarily care about a thread and like leave them. Like we're in a season, and it almost feels like they're just like dropping threads.
Yeah,
Does it feel to you like they're dropping threads?
just dropping them. Well, and what is nice about this show is that it is based
Let's
off
not type on
3
a
books.
book.
Three
3 books.
3 books.
Really?
Yeah. So my friend Bourbon Beard, who fan of the show, he was talking about that he's read the books, and so there is.
Really?
I feel like there is a destination to where this is going. He didn't tell me anything, thankfully, but
it does like I don't feel like this is a lost situation yet.
Mm-mm.
Because it like the fact that we're in the season makes me feel like they won't forget about the threads they've opened up this season.
Yeah, I think so. The maybe knowledge that Judicial has that's deeper, like maybe they know things that happened from the before times that they're like, okay, like yes, this is bad that there's a fall guy that goes out,
Right.
that we make go out and clean, but overall, like we've seen what happens when the silo descends into madness, and that is such a bad time that for the greater good we need everybody to just be, hey, we just need a fall guy to keep everything in control.
Right. And that's kind of like what we saw with, this whole Judge Meadows thing of like they created this complicated scenario where they give Juliet false information so she wastes her time down a rabbit hole. They get the right person, which they've like set up as the patsy, they get Juliet out of the picture because she seems incompetent. They get the order taken care of because, somebody is now responsible for the crime. Who knows how long it would have taken to like figure out all of these situations, and then they also get somebody that they can like get to do what they want.
Right. And it's almost
And it's
like
it's
controlling all the branches of everything.
right. So it's interesting kind of seeing these kind of like machinations of all the things that they're trying to do. And once again, it is potentially for the good of people. But it's crazy because you mentioned the outside. At this point, it's like barely being referenced. Like this is such a slow burn.
Right. It really is. And a little
That
bit
was like the biggest thing in the beginning.
right. It was, are we going outside? Can we not go outside? And yet we've still had like teases about the
Teases.
outside. And
Little tiny teases.
we got a tease of the syndrome in this
Yes.
episode. And
And
nothing lingered on it. Just, oh, he has the syndrome. Like it was casually known.
if you hadn't seen that sign, what is the likelihood that you're going to connect that with like what happened to Juliet's parent, like brother, and potentially her mom? Like they're really taking their time
They
on
really,
things. It's wild.
really are. And we kind of learned some new things about the Pact. Two things that don't make sense.
Yes.
And so the first thing, can't use any pulleys or mechanical thing to go up and down the silo. And two, we can't use anything to magnify, like we can't use a certain magnification, so you can't be able to work on really small computer chips or things of that nature. What are your thoughts on those?
I kind of feel like pulleys and lifts, like those are things that could potentially be used to get all the way down into like the water area, find out what's going on at the very bottom, which seems like another important mystery that's just been like brought up and then barely mentioned again.
Yeah.
Because once again, it's such a slow burn. So I feel like that is a dangerous tool that could get things from there to other people and spread that information of whatever it is that's being hidden. I don't know what it is. And then the other part is that I don't know. I think maybe the ability to build like computers and
They have computers.
prop they
They have a whole IT department.
but those might be very rudimentary and they might be like created, installed, and fixed by the IT department. So that's not something that like the general public can create on their own, because it definitely seemed like you like I don't feel like you get to buy that and there's like different operating systems and it's like which do you
Yeah.
want? Like I think it's Silo OS.
Right.
Like it's a silo computer, silo operating system. People can't build something to try and hack into it
Right.
because that would be dangerous if people could reverse engineer and then access like the intranet.
Right. Get some of that maybe secret information.
It does seem like information is potentially dangerous here.
Yeah. Well, so my theory on why these things
Okay.
can't be in the Pact, is I think there is a part of who's ever running the scenes behind the silo. They're trying to find they're trying to keep the people of the silo in almost like a dark age a little bit. You know, we have no
Okay.
history, and it
Yeah.
seems like we don't want to have any more technological advancements. Like if you aren't spending your time going up and down the silo, you're going faster there, you have more time to think, you have more time to do things. Like walking the silo is a huge part of the silo, as well as if you can't magnify to a certain thing, you can't get more advanced computers and whatnot. And I think part of that is to keep them so they don't find a way to get out of the silo. So they don't make something that can help them venture out outside. Maybe. I think it's they want to keep them a little bit in the dark.
It's why because they are so in the dark. They don't know what stars are.
They don't even know what stars are. We found out what Lucas was doing.
Okay, so does Lucas not know? Because I'm pretty sure that what he discovered was Cassiopeia. This is now like there's part of me that says, okay, these are five prominent stars. It's one of the constellations that is generally viewable the entire time, because it's like pretty close to the center of the circle. So it's not like some of them where it's like they, go down at one point and then later on they like come up at another point and so you can't like see the full circle. So I can see an argument for he discovered it and it was kind of natural. But also he's he knows about Romeo and Juliet when Walker doesn't, and Walker seems to be pretty knowledgeable,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Like
Walker.
I can't
Lucas is an interesting
I
character for sure.
he is. Like is he just there because he's eventually going to he's asking the right questions which like then helps her figure things out, or is he like continuing to test the waters?
I think he's testing because he asked her about like the rebels, and he's like, "Oh, that can get me arrested," and she was just
Right.
like, "I wouldn't know. Like I'm, still new, trying to figure this out." So I and like, how does finding these stars connect with like them figuring out that they're in a silo that it's rotating? It doesn't even seem like they know that they're rotating on the Earth.
Right. Right, yeah, like they wouldn't know the bigger picture of like their place in the universe because I don't think they necessarily understand the big picture of their place on this earth. It's wild that like information has been kept to that level, like down to the point where I really like your breakdown of kind of like the intro because I do think that the more that we see, like we talked about people being like the lifeblood, and like this, everything being for the good of the silo. And seeing that more and more, seeing the signs, seeing the way people talk about it, seeing the fact that like every job is important,
Yeah.
it definitely feels like your views on the silo of like it's seeming like the people's seem like the blood of it. So kind of continuing on with those thoughts and thinking about the intro, an apple falls from the we get to see above the silo and there's trees, and an apple falls from the tree and we get to see it kind of go underground, but it also kind of makes me wonder if that apple for one reason or another represents knowledge, whether it's like the
Ooh.
apple that fell on Newton's head. I know that's not necessarily a completely true story, or like the apple of like the knowledge of good and evil in like the Garden of Eden, where that apple gives them knowledge. Like it does seem like as much as this society is all about taking care of each other and doing things for the good of the silo, because life is so fragile in here, it does also seem like limiting information is important for this life. for one, or at least somebody views it that way.
And going back to the funeral, we saw basically a visual representation of them burying the apples. So burying that knowledge from everybody. Like everybody takes a bite of the knowledge, throws it in, it's buried.
Yeah.
This is quite a mystery. Which brings us to our next topic of Sims and questions related to Sims and the silo. So,
The janitor's son.
janitor's son, but it doesn't seem like he was a janitor.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so with Sims, I still don't think he's necessarily a bad guy, right?
Right?
I know.
Right.
I
Right.
know. Well, he did push a guy off floor.
Yeah. That's a pretty bad thing.
But if you look at why he did it, Sims to me seems like he is almost like a zealot that cares so much about the silo that he's willing to do anything to protect the silo. And that's almost kind of what his dad seemed like. So he's getting bullied at school. He doesn't know what to do. The dad, seemingly a janitor, gets this bully moved to a different floor. Like, such a small thing, but so big in keeping the silo in a working order. Oh, there's a fight going on here between two kids? Separate them. Like, let's make sure that the silo is always functioning and always going. So I think Sims is just dedicated to saving the silo. And he does questionable things. And I think that's why he pushed him, because he was messing up. And he knew that if that guy got caught, it could mean the secrets of Sims, that janitorial closet, might come to light. So I don't know.
It's wild because it's really hard to get a read on him. Seeing him with his child, he clearly has the ability to be affectionate. He was trying to be nice to the mayor and the deputy, when they were near judicial.
Mm-hmm.
He was like trying to outreach to them, but also he knew about George Wilkins' death, and Doug was surprised by that. So that wasn't.
Oh.
If Sims had a hand in that, Doug didn't know that Sims had a hand in that.
See, I thought Sims did know, or I thought that Doug did know Sims had a hand in it.
He did not. I'd have to look through my notes to see exactly where this was, but when he said you fucked up twice.
Yeah.
Once with George Wilkins, and Doug said something like, you knew about that, or something like that, where it made it clear that
I thought that, so the way I understood that was that he fucked up with George Wilkins because it wasn't purely thought to be a suicide. And that they were like, oh, it's actually more than a suicide, it's a murder, and there was more of an investigation into the murder of George Wilkins. Like, he didn't do it that clean, apparently. Because it does seem like...
But Doug seemed legitimately surprised that Robert knew about that at all. So I don't think it was just like, you messed up on the method. I don't think it was that. I think it was legitimately like, oh, you knew about that? I didn't write down the exact words, but...
Because it did seem that Sims knew about setting up Kennedy as the fall guy, and he messed up on that, and that was his other big fuck up. But also, what makes me think that he is in on it is Sims went to Deputy Marne's house, and I believe he went there to make sure there was no guard posted so that he could
Right.
send Doug there to go kill him.
I do think so. I do think so. And here's the thing is that they've got an interesting relationship where Sims is using Doug potentially because I think because Doug already did this crime. And so,
Which crime?
like of George Wilkins.
Mm.
And so he's like, here's somebody who's willing to do things, extreme things for the good of the silo. But also having somebody that's willing to do that stuff means that that person may also make some extreme decisions of their own because Sims was in the janitor's closet and Doug approached that and Sims came out and Sims said something like, "Why are you here?" And Doug said, "I followed you here another time."
Yeah.
So Sims did not tell Doug that he would be there. And that's the small portion we saw, which the door didn't open all the way. We couldn't see like the third wall that the door isn't on. So it's possible that leads to a hallway. Otherwise, Sims was in a closet.
I do think that closet is, important, and I think there's a whole group of Sims-like people that go into that janitorial closet.
But Sims didn't share that.
Right.
So there's like this interesting interplay of like Sims potentially using Doug because Doug is the person that is willing to do extreme things if needed. But also Doug kind of screwed up a little too much. And so Sims is going to have to like clean it up.
Well, so do you think... So then, like, what would have been the intent of Doug murdering George Wilkins? Like, so to me, it seems like Judicial would want him murdered because he found that relic, the hard drive or whatever. And to me, Doug didn't seem like other than, going to the janitorial closet, he's not an ideas guy.
Yeah.
He seems like he's
Yeah,
an
no.
orders following guy. Like, to me, it seems like he was following the order to kill George Wilkins. And it does seem that he had, like, he was already mentioned before he followed him down to the janitor closet that he was in league to be his shadow. So it made it seem that he gave him the order to kill George Wilkins, but he just didn't do it properly. That's how I took it. But I guess we'll see on that one. I don't know.
It's really tough to tell on this. It's possible that Sims had a hand in that first one, but like didn't let Doug know that he had a hand. Like maybe he had somebody else give the order.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
That way he could, at least like for the first crime to see how it goes, he could have plausible deniability or something along those lines. Because Doug did seem surprised by that. But that also kind of brings us to something else kind of Pact adjacent.
Okay.
Which is like and doing things for the greater good and kind of the way like this world building shadows.
Yes.
It's does every position have this? Like does a janitor need a shadow? Does like it and this kind of goes back to like every position is important.
Right.
Or maybe the janitor need a shadow because it wasn't actually a janitor. Because there's like something crazier going on there. But like it's wild that we are seeing, we saw Juliet with her shadow, like not letting him touch anything.
Yeah.
And it seems like that goes on for a while. Like this place potentially has, if you think about like sanctioned relationships,
Mm-hmm.
they potentially have X number of positions, and maybe alongside of we know that actually I was about to say maybe alongside of sanctioned relationships they have like sanctioned births. We know that there's like you go into like a lottery to see whether or not you can try to procreate. And obviously, if they're looking for 10 of these and 9 are successful, then they have like an extra one for the next one. Like who knows how this works, but it's like it seems like things are so controlled so that they can like control the output of babies so that they can have the exact number of people that they need to like refresh current jobs. Like it's
And they're even deceptive about the babies, where we saw Holston and his wife, Allison, they were cleared to have a baby, but then also not allowed to have a baby.
right. Right, which okay, so that I completely forgot about. Like, what once again goes back to like, who knows this stuff?
Right. I feel like there's a
Who knows
secret
it?
organization that like isn't even judicial. Like I'm almost thinking like judicial isn't even it. That there's like another sub-secret
It's the
organization.
janitors.
Well, yeah, cuz the way he made it sound is that like there's a group of people that are like janitors or bookkeepers or clerks,
Yes, he said yes. He said a bunch of them.
and they just seem like normal people, but at the end of the day they are what are making the silo function. So I wonder if there is a secret cabal.
Okay, I didn't understand that statement when he said that. It was like he's not a bookkeeper, he's not these other things. Why is he saying that? I was very confused by that, but now that you're pointing out that maybe it's not the position of janitor, maybe it's like literally this one position of janitor and this one bookkeeper position, like there are these strategic ones that are part of this larger group. I didn't understand it, like that was very confusing to me.
Yeah, so I think there's a whole group of them, and like they just blend into the silo, but they're actually like doing the like, oh, we have to move this person. And I thought when Cindy was going down to the new job, I thought that that was something that like they realized that Juliet and Cindy were too close to like figuring things out and like
Yeah.
kind of working together, so that they sent her down to stop that from happening. It's all part of it.
It's wild. It's hard to keep it. The show doesn't really have a lot of tells on what's coming out. It does
Yeah.
have some, like there are some of these like signs and some of these other things. We've done some shows that I think definitely have more Easter eggs.
Yeah.
This show, I think, keeps Easter eggs down to a minimum so that it can keep surprises to a maximum. Because I think it's really tough to figure out what's going to happen next because it's really limiting. So unfortunately, that means that it's not necessarily and rewarding repeated views
Mm-hmm.
as quite as much because it's keeping things so close to the chest.
Yeah.
Like really waiting and like it doesn't seem like it's giving you nuggets that you can potentially really use to see that other thing. And I'm still digging it for that,
Oh
but like
yeah.
that's
I have a question.
okay.
Okay. Rat poison. We don't see any animals in the silo. We see cows 1 second early on. There's rat poison, meaning there's rats. were the rats built into the silo? Can the rats come and go freely? Are the rats bringing in the syndrome?
Rats are really tough to control, and I wanted to pause and like scrub back to see what she said about this. So please don't like take this as anything because I really don't know. But she took some stuff up and she sent him somewhere with rat poisoning. My thought is like because everything has to be recycled and to be reused, that she literally sent him with that evidence to go back to wherever rat poisoning goes. Which is wild. Like if you think about our world, it's like that's gonna sit in like a police locker.
Yeah.
Please don't quote me on this. I really don't know if that's the case. But I got that impression. I wanted to look at it again. But I think that is something that they potentially have available at recycling.
Just rat poison.
Because rats
it makes sense.
They're pervasive things. Like they get things out.
So, and it just like makes me wonder, like back to the instruments, like were these instruments created in the silo? Were like rat poison, is it made in the silo? Like how do you continue? Oh, this is a big question I have. They're drinking water. Where does the water come from? We do see the water at the bottom, and I don't know if they're pulling from that water, but they all have access to water.
But they don't have any large sources to the point where people would feel comfortable being submerged in it.
Right.
It's weird.
And for people that don't understand the outside, right? All of their apartments have windows. What are the windows like? If you have these windows in your apartment, you would think that that's like, oh, we used to be able to look outside in our old houses, and that's a thing. But like, why would they need windows in the silo? All the apartments have it.
Right. We were like theorizing on that we're wrong about, I think, which is like the color blue.
Yeah.
Yeah, where I'm seeing it more and more.
Yeah.
It definitely doesn't seem like a rare color.
No.
I mean, like, that was a thing at one point, and history got us past that point where it's like people figured out how to manufacture it. So, but yeah, it's like this world is weird as far as like, and it's interesting that going to those displays that up top would have better displays in the cafeteria than
down below.
The down deep. So it's like they're all saying the same thing, but they're not spending as much money on the display the further down you go.
Right.
So the people, that's wild that like the people down deep can't even necessarily see that there are stars in the sky.
Right. And well, even just the difference. So when Cindy talks about like that she's from the lower mids, like which isn't the down deep, but she treats her like we're not like you guys, like we're not.
Yes.
And it's such an like the fact that she feels so differently about the down deep from being lower mids.
Right.
Like it's just
like right on the cusp.
Right.
Like let's be honest. You're sitting on the line.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. So like what does that mean for these different sections of society? And I did notice this time that, and we've talked about it, but definitely the graffiti is only in the down deep. It's when you're up higher, you don't see the graffiti at the up top. There's no graffiti. It's all nice. It's like you're in the suburbs up there, and then below you're in like
Right.
the ghetto.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the tattoos. Like,
Right.
I feel like pretty much everybody in the Down Deep is tatted, and
Nobody up
like
top
the
is.
mids and above tattoos, which is, I mean, it does make sense. Like if you have like if you're on that line of like lower mids,
Mm-hmm.
really connecting between something else, and let's just say that there are like two cafeterias that are almost equidistant because you're technically on the lower mids instead of like the down deep. So you're not like it's a one floor difference. If it's already going to take you a moment to go to a cafeteria and the one going up is a little bit nicer, you're probably going to go that way. So it's like it the amount of time it takes to travel to places, the fact that there are like cafeterias on different levels, police on different levels, the medical on different levels, it kind of creates like mini silos in the silo
Right.
where yeah, there's a little bit of like I'm sure you cross over with your neighbors that are a few levels below. You see them, you chat with them, whatever. But it really kind of like creates these like mini, you know, things
Communities?
inside of like
Mini
communities inside of
communities.
large communities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it does. It keeps them kind of separate. And maybe that's another part of why they don't have pulleys and elevators. They don't want people from the down deep to get all the way up top so that they can,
think
like,
about this. The news about Marnes was sent by Porter. It was not sent by, and she
a
has a
walkie
radio on
talkie.
her
Yeah.
walkie talkie. 100% they could have used that. They know that people, the Pact says you can't build a radio, but they know that people do. And because they know that people do, they sent that via Porter to protect that information.
Wild.
How wild is that? Like, did you see that person come up? Like, he was gasping air.
Yeah. And it didn't
That was like,
say on the thing that she read, it didn't say Deputy Marnes has been murdered. It said there was a murder. So if the porter were to read
I
it,
didn't even think about that.
that's still keeping the information tucked in because the porter won't know who got murdered.
I didn't even think about that. That is wild. So it's like they're really trying to avoid information from getting around. Like they know that even though radios are not allowed, somebody could build it. So let's use a porter for this information, but still keep it vague. How terrible is that? Like to send a note to the sheriff like that and hold out something that important.
Wild. That's wild to me. But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining us. Next week, we will be tackling Silo, episode 6. So please come back next Monday and join us. I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.
Thanks.